The changing physical reality we experience every day is a three-dimensional shadow cast by a static, four-dimensional source. For over a century, modern physics has operated under a pervasive category error. Within this framework, it is called the Minkowski trap. The trap occurs when we treat a mathematical coordinate, time, as an actual structural dimension of the universe. Lorentzian coordinates are highly effective tools for tracking motion, but their success led physicists to assume the map was the territory. In reality, time is an operational gauge used to sequence measurements, existing separately from the foundational geometry of the source. This framework retains the relativistic equations Einstein developed. Lorentzian covariance, invariant intervals, and operational clock mechanics are mathematically accurate and indispensable for calculating physical events. We can rely on clocks to track objects and calibrate sensors, but that utility does not grant time source-level substance. Time is a gauge for making measurements, not a dimension you can travel through. Mistaking that gauge for a structural dimension has obscured the actual geometry generating our universe. Lower dimensional projections are often associated with the holographic principle. Standard holographic models require bolt boundary dualities, encoding a volume of space using information bounds located on an enclosing surface. This arrangement is rejected here. Instead of an enclosing surface encoding a simulation, a complete non-temporal source directly projects into a three-dimensional manifold. The disciplined mathematical relation governing how the shadow reads that projection is called 4D-Counterduction. Counterduction is the active process of realization. It is distinct from the 4D counterspace itself. The source geometry exists independently. Counterduction is the specific mechanism by which that geometry becomes readable to us. The universe is an active, selective readout of a complete four-dimensional reality. The first axiom of this theory states that the complete content of all admissible reality already exists within the non-temporal 4D counterspace. The translation between that static whole and our physical experience is governed by the extrinsic constitutive law, or ECL. This mathematical map dictates exactly how the shadow reads the source. This diagram maps the ECL architecture. On the left, the complete source translates into informational organization, then is assigned a complete readability profile. A selector extracts a discrete slice. The final output is the physical observable, concrete data measured in the three-dimensional shadow. Each of these steps is a strictly isolated mathematical object. This type discipline ensures we never confuse the originating geometry with the final measurement. The observable physical world is a meticulously governed, slice-by-slice geometric readout of a static whole. This chart maps the mass and radius of all observable physical objects, revealing the limits of physical existence. The central wedge is tightly constrained by the Schwarzschild limit for black holes on the left, and the Compton quantum limit at the bottom. These boundaries represent projective limits of the shadow domain itself, not independent physical forces in a void. Within these bounds, general relativity is successfully recovered using the established ADM constraint formalism. In this relational formulation of gravity, the universe is ordered slice by slice. The ordering label used to sequence those three-dimensional geometries is purely mathematical gauge freedom. This geometry becomes critical at the edges of spiral galaxies, where the outer borders rotate far faster than visible mass dictates. Alternative gravity models, like AQUAL, resolve this by applying a universal acceleration scale that matches galactic data without requiring dark matter. Under 4D counterduction, this AQUAL scale is a mapped reduction of the embedding geometry that connects the 3D shadow to the 4D source. As the shadow is embedded into the source, the relationship between three-dimensional and four-dimensional coordinates creates a specific transition point. This geometric crossover is what our instruments record as the universal acceleration scale. The gravitational forces holding galaxies together are geometric artifacts of how a 4D reality is embedded into a 3D shadow. If there is no temporal dimension, how do organisms mutate, adapt, and develop? Mutation, ecological drift, and selection remain valid mechanisms, but they operate as shadow-level effective descriptions of a sequence. To conceptually separate a temporal sequence from a timeless source, consider this exact line dividing the rock stratigraphy, the Chicxulub asteroid impact marker. Most geological markers are the result of sequential decay, But the iridium anomaly in this layer is mass-independent, meaning it appears as a singular marker regardless of the geological time series. It points straight to a singular point of origin. In biology, canalized traits function like this iridium marker. While most traits drift through evolutionary time, canalized traits reach the same stable endpoints regardless of genetic history or environmental path. This path independence proves the traits are anchored to the pre-existing geometry of the source. Canalization allows biological systems to consistently produce the same phenotypes despite heavy genetic or environmental disruption. Completely independent evolutionary lineages repeatedly converge on identical anatomical forms. This points to a rigid, pre-existing geometric constraint within the available morphospace. The incredibly stable forms of life on Earth are simply rigid topological shadows cast by an invariant four-dimensional architecture. Wielding this framework requires a strict cartographic ethos. We must rigorously separate the governing source architecture, the actual territory, from our provisional mathematical models, which are incomplete maps. This table defines explicit failure conditions, ensuring the theory remains falsifiable and scientifically accountable. If a specific map designed to calculate galaxy kinematics fails to accurately predict cluster lensing, that mathematical map is refuted. The 4D source ontology remains intact, but the map used to reach it is proven incorrect. Scientific rigor requires knowing exactly when our mathematical descriptions break, preventing us from confusing a broken equation with a broken reality. Relocating time from an ontological dimension to a local operational gauge maintains our established physics and biology. It replaces the concept of an unguided universe grinding forward into an unknown future with a perfectly structured, pre-existing geometry. The entire history of biological life and the physical cosmos is precisely the sequential unfurling of a perfectly completed whole. Spacetime is the breathtaking shadow of a timeless reality we are finally learning how to read.